Good evening. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight on a beautiful July 1st in Rochester, a rare, perfect weather day. And really, thank you all for coming. It's very meaningful, and I hope you enjoy yourself immensely. Before I intro our first speaker, I'd like to just share the initial catalyst for this idea. So about a couple months ago, Rebbe Vogel and I were talking that this happens to be a big milestone in the Chabad calendar. It's the 30th Yahrzeit of the Rebbe, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, blessed memory, who was an incredible influence on us and really on world Jewry, and as you'll see, much of the world. So in thinking of how to mark this milestone, 30 years is an important milestone. There's many ways you could do something. You could make it a legacy event. You could highlight the individual's accomplishments. You could tell stories. But in true Rebbe fashion, one of the greatest things of the Rebbe was that the Rebbe, besides being a great scholar, besides being a great lover of the Jewish people and Jewish destiny, besides being a tremendous activist, and so on, the Rebbe was an essential thinker. He taught all of us how to get to the essence of an issue, of an idea, the essence of a person, their soul, the essence of a time and place. And that was really a recurring theme of what is the essence of things, people, places. So what's the essence of the Rebbe? That's a very, very big question. And I'm not going to answer that right now, but as you'll see, we're going to take one area of the Rebbe's thinking, of the essence of the matter, of what is America, and how does it play into the Jewish story. So I'd like, before we introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to invite Rabbi Vogel, my father-in-law, the rabbi of Chabad Rochester for over 40 years, to share his personal recollections of the Rebbe.
Thank you, Rabbi Yitzi. Good evening, everyone, and it's just a pleasure to see you all here. As noted, we're commemorating the 30th anniversary of the passing of the Rebbe. The actual date of that is the 3rd of Tammuz, which will be next Tuesday. So here we are 30 years later, and the Rebbe's vision lives on. And just from a very personal perspective, it was in July of 1981, that makes it 43 years ago, that I and my wife of blessed memory and our daughter Dvara Leah were sent by the Rebbe to settle in Rochester and set up Chabad of Rochester. We were inspired. Why did we come here? I'm from London, my wife was from Belgium. What are we doing in Rochester, New York? But we were inspired by the Rebbe's vision of going out there and helping all Jews strengthen their Jewish identity. And a major part of this inspiration came from being at the Rebbe's Farbrengens, the gatherings that the Rebbe would hold. And being at a Farbrengen was an experience plus. We packed into the synagogue at 770 Eastern Parkway, bleachers going up the walls, hundreds and hundreds of people there. The Rebbe sat at a table on a platform and delivered a series of talks. And on Shabbos and holidays, it was without a microphone. And between each talk, the crowd would sing a melody, a nigun, and it would be an opportunity for us to have a little cup of wine, raise the cup, and catch the Rebbe's eyes, the Rebbe scanning the crowd, and there was that moment of eye contact and a nod. This was the l'chaim, and that was part of the experience. Typically, at these Farbrengens, the Rebbe would explain Torah concepts based either on the Torah portion of the week or upcoming holidays, and once in a while the Rebbe would speak on societal issues as well. A Farbrengen could last several hours, sometimes exhausting, but always exhilarating. And looking back, this goes back 30 plus years ago, many of us did not fully appreciate how the Rebbe was not only speaking to those of us present at the Farbrengen, but he was speaking to the world at large and to the future, and that his teachings would continue to make such amazing impact. One of the things that is so remarkable about the Rebbe's leadership was that here was a Hasidic Rebbe. You hear that phrase, Hasidic Rebbe, and you conjure up those paintings from the shtetl of a rabbi, I guess long white beard, surrounded by Hasidim in a synagogue. They're studying or they're dancing. It's kind of that quaint shtetl picture. But here was a Hasidic Rebbe who not only addressed his Hasidic community about Hasidic learning and living, but whose message was directed to the world at large. A Hasidic Rebbe who talked about American values and lifting up society at large, and who cared for the welfare and growth of public school children. Here was a Rebbe, not just for his Hasidim, but a Rebbe for the world.
Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Rabbi Aaron Herman. Originally from Pittsburgh, Rabbi Herman attended yeshiva schools and Chabad institutions throughout his life in the U.S. and abroad. He was the head of school at the Jewish Academy in Raleigh, North Carolina, and founded Chabad of Cary, North Carolina. Personal connection, my best friend took over his leadership there. Renowned for his teaching schools, he is a senior writer for the JLI, the Jewish Learning Institute, including the courses The Land and the Spirit about Israel and Beyond Never Again about the Holocaust, and they've been acclaimed by adult learners. Currently residing in Pittsburgh, Rabbi Herman is one of the founders of the Zohar Seminary, where he continues to develop and teach Jewish education curriculums to great delight of all. Without further ado, Rabbi Herman.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's a very quick trip from Pittsburgh to Rochester. Didn't know that until now. So, wanted to start with tell a joke. There were a few people on the train. There was a Russian, a Cuban, a Frenchman, an American, and an attorney. It's already funny, I know. The Russian pulls out some caviar. He says, "We have so much caviar in Russia. Who needs it?" Throws it out the window. The Cuban pulls out a Cuban cigar. He says, "There's so many of these. Who needs them?" The Frenchman pulls out some wine. He says, "We have such good wine in France. Who needs it?" The American picks up the attorney, throws him out the window. Which, as an attorney, I can make these jokes, right? But the reason why I'm starting with this is because in our environment currently, political, social, we very often focus on small things, and that's why we make fun of attorneys, because they seem to be focused on just being litigious and difficult, and there's way too many of them in America doing way too many things to, not allow us to move forward, so we make attorney jokes. But I would like us to take a step back. And really, how do we have attorneys? We have attorneys because we have law. And we have law because we have a constitution and a rule of law in this country. And one of the things that I would like to take a look at is the way in which Judaism, in particular, looks at our era. We live in a very unusual era currently. And one of the things that can sometimes happen is that we can become very myopic. We think that this is the way it is, and therefore that's the way it's going to stay. And Jewish life is sort of the counter argument to that. I remember when I was a kid, I went to Mount Vernon, I went to Monticello, I went to Colonial Williamsburg, and I was, this is 200 years old, this is 300 years old. Wow, it's so old. And then I took my first trip to Israel. This is 800 years old, this is 1800 years old, this is 2,800 years old. They always have to decide how far they're going to go down to, And we have a very long history as Jews where we have experienced many, many different circumstances, and that provides a very long view of history and a way to be able to shape, I think, our thinking as we move forward as a culture and as individuals. So I'd like to begin by talking about the democracy that we have in this country. Many people are not aware that, besides for, of course, drawing on Roman and Greek sources, a lot of the development of democracy actually happened due to biblical sources. Specifically, due to a lot of the scholarship that was happening around Manasseh ben Israel, the Dutch Hebraists were a group of people who were taking a look after the Protestant Reformation back at the various Jewish works. The New Testament doesn't contain a lot about how to govern, whereas the Old Testament, together with its Talmudic explanations, its rabbinic scholarship, including Maimonides, has an entire sense of what should government look like. And these Dutch Hebraists, who were in correspondence with Menashe ben Israel, the most famous rabbi of the time, that's why he ended up being painted by Rembrandt, because he was in those circles. Specifically, Grotius and Vossius were really very, very taken by the way in which Judaism had set up a governmental system. And they were looking at the way in which there was a separation of powers, that there were ways that it was with consent of the governed. There could not be a monarch unless there was consent of the governed. And these individuals ended up being very, very influential on the English scholars that we're aware of, John Selden, foremost among them, but also John Locke, Milton. And one of the things that's very interesting is that democracy, therefore, owes a lot of its roots to the Hebrew Bible, to the Jewish Bible, and to the understanding that developed out of it. And you can see this a little bit in terms of just the writings of the time. When you take a look at previous political theory, so let's say Petrarch, for example, he mentions the Bible about 10 times in his entire book. Machiavelli, I think, barely at all. Whereas once you get to Milton, Locke, Selden, you can't, it's on every page. So this biblical understanding was very important in the development of what became our democracy. And when it comes to the framers of our Constitution, this biblical understanding resonated for them very, very strongly. You can see it all through their writings. The most famous of all, of course, is Washington's letter to the Jews in Newport. The Jews in Newport were welcoming Washington on a state visit after having ratified the Constitution in 1790. And Washington, in telling the Jewish people about this new democracy and these new values, actually was able to dispel what they thought he said. They wrote to him about the fact that they appreciated the toleration that America had shown. And he actually says in his letter, it's not toleration at all. He says, it is now no more that toleration is spoken of, as it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. Now the famous part, most people have heard this, for happily the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effectual support. So this is the famous letter that Washington writes where he's saying, no, the reason you have rights is very much coming out of your own biblical book. You have it because God has given you rights. For the first time, the government's going to get out of the way. And you have it as a result of just being you. And so these are the democratic values that were being established during this period of time. And we see the way that the biblical echoes were in the framers' minds as they were founding this new country. Most famously, of course, in trying to design the Great Seal of the United States. Ben Franklin wanted Moses with his hand outstretched and the waters coming back over Pharaoh. Jefferson wanted the Jews in the desert with the cloud leading them by day and the pillar of fire at night. They didn't end up choosing those two, but those were their suggestions. So again, you see these biblical echoes that are going on within the founding fathers' lives. Washington, in many of his letters, puts and conceives of this American experiment using the words of the prophets, everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and he also puts that in the letter to the Jews of Newport, that this would be his wish, his blessing for this nation. And so So when we come to, of course, the way in which the framers conceived of the country, they conceived of the country as being one in which everybody was able to be themselves, where you were able to worship as you pleased, and that it was specifically in the context of diversity that you would have a unified nation, which is really, again, as the Rebbe, and we'll try to bring some of the Rebbe's thoughts back into this, that e pluribus unum, out of the many one. That diversity is not problematic. When you take a look at much of Europe, there was the attempt to create conformity whenever possible. So even when Napoleon was freeing the Jews, he didn't fully free the Jews. It came at a price. It was, you are Frenchmen, you can kind of have a Jewish club. But you're Frenchmen first. You're French citizens. Whereas the American experiment was, you can be who you are. We're getting out of the way. And we want you to be you, and it's specifically by having each individual be who they are that we can then achieve something greater than the sum of its parts. Now, I wanted to reflect on this a little bit in terms of what actually happens. The American Jewish experience didn't really live up to what Washington talked about. In the end, when you take a look at American Jewish history, you see waves of immigration followed by integration to the point where very often Jewish identity was lost. So if you take a look at some of the Jews who were, I lived in North Carolina, there was the Mordecai house. You know, he had converted to Christianity, however. There was no Jewish communal support. There was no ability to really build a Jewish communal infrastructure in America. And so you have waves of immigration. You have the German Jews coming and the Polish Jews coming. But essentially, the story is one of becoming more Americanized. Let me give you my family history as an example. So my great-grandfather lived in Romania. He was born in the 1870s. And all of his children came to this country. He wouldn't come. Why wouldn't he come? He said, the air is treif. Literally, the air is not kosher. Right? What did he mean by that? He meant that he lived a full Jewish life in Romania. He was able to keep Shabbat. He was able to keep kosher. Coming to this new country, what was going to happen? Well, there was a 6-day work week. The day of rest was not Saturday. So if you wanted to keep the traditional Shabbat, you had to quit your job every week. And kosher was, they estimate in New York City that half of all kosher chickens that were sold were not kosher. This was the Wild West going on here, literally, when compared to Europe. You couldn't lead a full Jewish life. So all of his children came, including my grandfather, who was the youngest of his children, and came right after World War I. When my grandfather came, he joined his brothers. You know, each brother had sent back for the next. They made enough money to send back for the next brother to come. And his brother was a baker, and so Herman's Bakery in Pittsburgh is famous. And you meet anybody in Pittsburgh over the age of 60, and you say, Herman's Bakery, and they're like, oh, we've never had a rye bread like that again since they closed. So what is the most important day of sale in a bakery? Saturday. Saturday. So although my grandfather was, Jewish and felt Jewish, and keeping Shabbat was not something that he was going to do. That was obvious. And what was the goal of that generation? The goal of that generation was really that their children shouldn't have to go through what they did and come and learn a trade. They should become professionals. So my father was that typical, first child. He went to Pitt University, had a 4.0, got into Harvard Law School. He was there when he was a 1L. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a 1L too before she transferred out. She was in Harvard for 1 year. He graduated Harvard Law School, came back to Pittsburgh to practice. I mean, this was success. Except for one thing. Something was lost. Something was lost in this transition. What was lost in this transition was, could you really lead a full Jewish life in America? Could you be as Jewish as you wished, or did you have to lose something in that attempt? Could you choose anywhere on that spectrum of observance to be, or was there a societal pressure of a melting pot? It's interesting because, to the Rebbe, this was the test of Washington's ideals. This was the test. Could people living in America, having been educated at the highest levels of American universities, would they actually choose to lead a more Jewish life? Tradition typically goes father to child, mother to daughter. Was it possible that this country is so free, is so conducive to being who you are, that tradition could go daughter to mother, son to father? That was the Rebbe's test. What was the essence of this country? Could that happen? The Rebbe's feeling was yes. That's why he sent people to Rochester, because he believed that, yes, you could restore a tradition. You could restore a Jewish way of life. You could be as Jewish as you wished in this country. So my parents actually went through that journey. Slowly. They weren't trying to become observant. They were just doing one mitzvah, and then another mitzvah, and then another mitzvah. You know what happens after you do a lot of mitzvahs? Other people start calling you observant. And it's interesting because my grandmother, who had come from Russia and lived in my house, we were one of those 3-generation households. My grandmother lived with us. She had come at age 9 in 1907. And as my parents started to become more observant, since she lived in the house, she did too. She returned to her original way of life as she was before she left Russia. And so when you look at a picture of my great-grandfather and look at a picture of me, we look remarkably similar. The great-grandfather who wouldn't come has a great-grandson who looks pretty much like him. That was the test that the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said, that's how you know America is truly free, because it allows you to be who you want to be. And that was the Rebbe's view of our society. There's a book that was recently published, which I highly recommend. The Rebbe had a complete social vision for what America could look like, based on these principles, based on the fundamental principles that our democracy is blessed with. What could this look like? And the problems that we have are, very often now people frame it as capitalism versus socialism, right? In a capitalistic system, it's the individual who is going to succeed over the collective. You're more worried about, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, do it yourself, self-made man. Whereas socialism says, well, okay, we got to favor the collective over the individual. The Rebbe's view, shaped, of course, from years and years of Jewish thought, is neither one of them has it. They both got an issue, but the issue can be solved. And the way that we solve it is simply that there's givers and receivers in this world, and that's a good thing. We don't often recognize it. We very often, especially because our society is the way it is, we take a look at those who are on the giving end and we say, well, you shouldn't need anything, neither a borrower nor a lender be, to quote Hamlet, right? And if you are, at least be the lender, don't be the borrower. But in Jewish life, that's not true. If you are who you are, that means you have something to give. And everybody else should be thankful that you're giving it. The Talmud says more than the wealthy individual should be thanked by the poor individual for giving charity. The wealthy individual should thank the poor individual for taking it. Thank you for allowing me to give. Because to actualize ourselves, we have to be givers. On the other hand, we also have to be a recipient in some other arena. We have to allow other people to give what they are able to give. And one of the big problems that we have is that this type of thinking is not in play in our society as much as it should be. So that we can recognize that the collective is just a bunch of individuals. So therefore we have to allow each individual to be who they are. At the same time, the individuals have to support the collective. So this explains a little bit more about what you saw in that video clip with the Rebbe. What the Rebbe was saying is this. As long as there's people in Chinatown who are not being cared for because they don't have the political in, they're not being visited by Senator Moynihan, I am, then I have to take the opportunity to bring Senator Moynihan's attention to what's happening in Chinatown. Because if they're not well cared for, if we go into a situation where groups have winners and losers, there's those who are advantaged and disadvantaged, then we're all losers. We all need to be on the lookout for each other. How can we raise the other person's ability to do what they can do and to give what they can give? So this is how we view ourselves as individuals, how we view ourselves in distinct groups. Each group has to make sure that every other group is doing well. That becomes the responsibility. Rather than what can I have or my group have, we're looking at how can I make sure that the other group has what they need. By the way, this works everywhere but football. I still think the Steelers should, make sure that the Bills, I imagine there's a lot of Bills fans, but other than football, this works. And it's true for each state. Isn't it interesting how each state vies for certain things from the federal government? You know what? Each state should be taking a look at other states and saying, wait, that state's having the problem. We shouldn't be throwing problems from state to state. That just distributes the problem to some other state. We're looking at the entire system in a different way. The collective and the individual are in a reciprocal relationship. And that changes the way that we view life. That was the Rebbe's vision. And that's what you were seeing as well in the Rebbe giving dollars to people. What was the Rebbe giving $1 for? The blessing we understand. $1, what's the dollar for? Because there's a Hasidic adage, the Rebbe would say, when two people meet, then a third person, something beautiful should happen for a third person. They're thinking about a third person. So the Rebbe would give $1. Two people meet. The Rebbe's meeting somebody. He gives them $1. The $1's for charity. Now, everybody would substitute a different dollar because they wanted the $1 from the Rebbe. But, so they would keep that as a keepsake. But then they would give a different $1 that they might not have given otherwise. So when two people meet, something good should happen for a third person. Imagine if we can go through life with that type of approach. And this is what the Rebbe believed that we would get to. It's difficult in our current fractious political environment and with the current way in which you see groups vying with each other and families not talking to each other and community. It's very difficult to imagine this. On the other hand, that's what Judaism is. It writes a counter story to everything that you see in society. How do societies change? Societies change because an idea grows until it becomes so obvious that we can hardly look back and say, how did we think differently? The notion that this is the way in which we can approach life is something that provides hope. One of the problems with postmodernism is that everything has fallen. We have deconstructed everything. On the other hand, what does that do? That gives you a great advantage because now there's something to construct. It's sort of like the old Jewish adage that atheism is wonderful. Why? The person has rejected all the false gods. So now they can actually find what God is all about. Perfect. So in much the same way, we have deconstructed everything. All of the isms that were, my uncles, I remember my uncles sitting around the table, each one arguing their position of what was going to save the world. Whether it was capitalism or socialism or some ism. Science would do it. Today, what's going to save the world? What's going to save the world is if we adopt an approach that actually has this kind of reciprocal caring. And the Rebbe saw America as leading that charge, that at the core of American life is this sense of goodness and kindness and wanting people to be able to lead their lives in a way that they can give what only they can give. That's the goal. As they say, you might as well be yourself. Everyone else is taken. And you can give what only you can give. But on the other hand, I have to be ready to receive that which you're giving. And then you have to be willing to receive that which I am giving. That's the way we build a different kind of world. That's the way we build a different kind of society. And that was the Rebbe's belief about the United States' position in the world, that ultimately we were influencing the world in that direction. What other country would send so much aid throughout the world? The Rebbe was a big believer in divine providence. And in that he shared a lot with Washington and the other framers, Jefferson aside. Most of the framers were not theists. Most of them believed that God actually providentially put this country into being at this point in time because it had mission and purpose. The Rebbe agreed and felt that that was at the core of American life, that there is a providential aspect, that there is something that we can do. As a good example of it, there's the story that the Rebbe had with Shirley Chisholm, she was the first black congresswoman, and she lived in Brooklyn, the Rebbe's district. And being that there was still racism in the House of Representatives at that point, instead of putting her on a committee that would have been normal for someone living in Brooklyn, like urban development, they put her on the committee for agriculture. How much agriculture goes on in Brooklyn? Not very much. The Rebbe, seeing this, asked his secretary to reach out to her and communicate the following message. By being on the Agriculture Committee, she got to know Bob Dole. And Bob Dole said, we have all this food, and we don't know what to do with it. And Shirley Chisholm and Bob Dole together started food stamps and then later WIC. And at her retirement party, she said, a rabbi who's an optimist taught me that what you may think is a challenge is a gift from God. If poor babies have milk and poor children have food, it's because this rabbi in Crown Heights had vision. So in your own life, in some fashion, you already have everything that you need to do to influence your surroundings. By divine providence, you are in a position that no one else is in, whether that's in terms of family, friends, community, city, country. Everyone has a sphere in which they operate. And the Rebbe's message to everybody was, much like Washington, this is providential. This is not something to take for granted. You can achieve something by looking at your circumstances. What can I do that no one else can? My father, after he became more Jewishly observant and he found out about tzedakah and about the Jewish standard of giving, he was started to be approached by a lot of people. And he once asked his rabbi, he said, what do I do? Do I give everybody who comes to the door? Every solicitation? So his Chabad rabbi told him, look, if somebody comes and asks you, comes to your door, give them something. But that's not where you give the bulk of your energy. The bulk of your energy and resources is given where you know that only you can make a difference. You find something that's undervalued, something that other people are not doing, and you step into that. That's where you know that you are set up to provide the support, the resources, the energy necessary to make that change that only you can make, because you've recognized how important this is and no one else is stepping up. So step up. And I think that that is a key element in our journey. Our journey is, what are the ways in which we can step up? Step up within our families, within our communities. What is the way that we can step up ourselves in our own growth as an individual, in our relationship with God, in our relationship with others? It all comes back to reciprocity. So I would like to bless all of you that we should see the Rebbe's vision. The Rebbe's vision was e pluribus unum. If we can each be ourselves and really accept who we are, give what only we can give, receive from others what they can give, then we will have e pluribus unum. Out of the many, we truly will see the oneness. Thank you.
cards. I didn't put them in polite.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Herman. We passed around some index cards and pens. Rabbi Herman will be taking questions for the next 10, 15 minutes. So we can take a minute or two to pass around the cards and pens. If you need some, over there, there's that gentleman over there has got some more you don't have in your row. While we're waiting to write, anybody wants to write their question, we'd love to have some good-spirited, as we say in Yiddish, and geschmacked questions, just want to share a couple of announcements before then. On your seat, I'll be doing a course that Herman actually authored for JLI about 10 years ago called To Be a Jew in the Free World, which is a lot of this material is culled from there. It's that plus Napoleon, Washington, the shtetl, anti-Semitism. We're going to be doing 4 of the classes this summer, starting next Wednesday, and we'd love you to join us. So the info is on the card. As well, before you leave, after the questions, as you saw, and you might have noticed from Herman's talk as well as the video, the Rebbe had many ways he educated people. And he educated, his whole life was education. Yet, if you think about, of all the mitzvahs the Rebbe educated and became almost his calling card for how he interacted with people, it wasn't the Rebbe with a gigantic Talmud, although the Rebbe was a Talmudist par excellence. It wasn't with, a Torah scroll, although the Rebbe commissioned and had his rabbis commission Torah scrolls. It was for the mitzvah of charity. You think this is a scholar, this is someone very, very erudite, whose whole life is about learning and teaching. You'd think maybe you'd find another mechanism, and he did have the mechanism of teaching through the Farbrengen, through his talks. But for the masses, the Rebbe felt that wasn't enough, and he encouraged the mitzvah of tzedakah, charity, or what is mistranslated, or loosely translated as charity. He said that mitzvah is such an important educational tool for ourselves and our children and everybody. And the Rebbe would not miss a chance with the thousands of people that came to meet the Rebbe every year for over 40 years to encourage each one to take a charity box. You're a businessman or you're a government official, put a charity box right on your desk. And start every day with a penny, a nickel, or people should see it. It becomes part of embedded to your identity, but this is your real identity. You are a giver. You are one of reciprocity. The Rebbe encouraged people to put a charity box in their kitchen. The kitchen is after, we got Wi-Fi, we have surround sound systems, but the kitchen is where the action, in Jewish houses especially, the kitchen is where the action is. So that every kitchen should have mounted, at least with a nail, a tzedakah box to the wall. Just like the mezuzah is a part of the Jewish house, a tzedakah box should be part, not just sit on the counter, which is good too, if you can't, if you don't want to ruin your nice walls. But if you couldn't mount it to the wall, this is a house of giving, a house of tzedakah, of charity. The Rebbe even encouraged, and it's interesting, this video that we showed is from a foundation that preserves the Rebbe's teachings and a lot of the videos that we have. So they did this it's every Saturday night they have a new matinee, a snippet of an idea of the Rebbe, of a certain aspect of his life, of his teachings. Happily, this past Saturday night was the Rebbe talking about every car should have a charity box. So it's you can see this is a very prevalent thing. From 1986 and on, the Rebbe made everybody had access to him on Sunday afternoons. And it wasn't just like come meet the Rebbe and get a selfie. They didn't call it selfies back then, but it was come meet the Rebbe. You could ask advice, you could ask for a blessing, but the framework was get $1 from the Rebbe. So as Rabbi Herman said, when 2 people meet, it should benefit a third. Okay, it became an opportunity to ask the Rebbe for his advice, for his blessing and whatnot, but it was always in that framework. So before you leave, we have these beautiful little, kitschy little tzedakah boxes called ARC boxes. It's a cute acronym of acts of routine kindness. Random, but they changed it to routine because they said the idea is more about, shouldn't be just spontaneous. It should be every day to do a penny and give 365 cents into the year rather than giving $3.65 in one shot. Because every day when you give a penny or a nickel or a dollar or whatever it is, it becomes a hand. Your hand becomes a hand that gives. And whatever you are, whether you're a fireman, a lawyer, a doctor, a plumber, whatever it is, you're not really that. You're really a giver. And that's, the Rebbe wanted to instill that real identity of every human being. So please help yourself to one of them on either side or at the entrance. And now we'll take questions with Rabbi Herman. I'm going to collect the cards.
Just want to comment that when I was a child, and my parents took me to the Rebbe, even as he was going in and out of his office, kids would stand there. The Rebbe would give me a nickel to put into the Tadaka Box. So this was a constant. And there's no better place than having a Tadaka Box than in your car, because after all, that's about the only time you have some change, if you're not using your credit card. But by the way, they do that too now. There's apps that you can get, so that because people forget to give, there's apps you can get where you can just click it and it'll give some money to charity on a daily basis. So that's good too. But there's no question that tzedakah was a huge theme of the Rebbe's, and like Rabbi Haim was saying, it's actually mistranslated. In Hebrew, it's not charity, which comes from the Latin from the heart. It's really justice, that, charity comes from the pocket. All right. What ways would you recommend for people to engage in their communities and help change the current divide we have in this country? Okay, so there are so many ways. I think being able to just communicate with other people who think differently than you do and to show them the basic dignity and respect that unfortunately sometimes is lacking, I think goes a long way. We've entered into a hyper-individualist society in some ways, because people are just online, and in other ways, echo chambers for people. So just being able to engage with people who think differently, it's really inviting people back into your kitchen. It's back to the kitchen thing. Bring people into your kitchen, eat, talk. That's always the way it's been done for such a long time. And I think it's looking for opportunities. I think that part of it is that sometimes we've given up. And to have hope once again, that really all you need to do is just reach out to one person. Yeah, you do that regularly, it adds up. Similar to the money in the Tadaka Box. So this is an interesting comment. Tzedakah should be anonymous, but unfortunately people want their giving recognized. So I'll give you an interesting thought in Jewish tradition, which is a couple of things. One level is, for the person who really needs it, they'll be okay if the person's recognized. They need the food. Right? In other words, to the recipient, they need it. There is a value in giving anonymously. Maimonides lists levels of charity, and the higher levels of charity are giving anonymously. However, in Jewish tradition, don't give everything anonymously. You know why? Because somebody else will look and say, he gives nothing, or she gives nothing. So give at least some. You want to give some anonymously? Absolutely. Give some things that nobody could say, they give nothing. All right. Okay, so can you speak about John Adams' religious beliefs and how they contribute to his influence on the establishment of the country? So Adams I'm not as familiar with, although I did take a look. What was the name of the historian who wrote a great book on John Adams? His name will come to me. Maybe one of them. I'm sorry? McCullough, yes. So I did read that book. One of the things that John Adams is spot on was he understood that slavery was a problem from the very beginning. So he has that, to his credit. What I love about John Adams, just in general, I don't remember enough to be able to speak extemporaneously about his religious beliefs fully, is he had a little arrogance to him. Some people called him his rotundity. And nonetheless, he got it done. Whatever needed to get done for the country, he got it done. And that's the other thing. Sometimes we think, when I'm perfect, that's when I will go out and help. When I've perfected myself, I'll go out and help other people. We have no time for that. It's the call of the hour. Wherever you are now, you can help. So you haven't perfected yourself, you still have flaws, that's okay. Okay. With such great freedom to worship and more free time for Jews on Shabbat, why do you think we are seeing steep declines in service attendance? At least well, it's around the country. I think that part of what we're seeing is that Judaism really is not, I'm going to say this carefully, it's not completely a shul-based religion. Okay? It's true that in this country, when we normally think about, like, where am I most closest to God, practicing my religion, we tend to think of a house of worship in America. However, in Jewish tradition, the greatest place to be a Jew is home, in your house. Yeah, that's the place for the Seder, lighting the Hanukkah menorah, and it's really, actually, I'll tell you a quick story that maybe will illustrate this. So it's true, we want synagogue attendance to rise. At the same time, we don't want people to think that you can only be Jewish in synagogue. I'll tell you a quick story from the Middle Ages, one of my favorite Jewish stories. Weird things happened to Jews in the Middle Ages, very strange things. One of them was, Jews were not allowed to have trades, so one of the things that they were innkeepers. But if you couldn't pay the landowner at the end of the year, they would throw you, into a dungeon, and basically until you got ransomed out, they would. So this is a true story, by the way, that actually happened. I'll tell you how we know it happened. There's true stories, then there's true stories that actually happened. So there's this landowner who told this Jew, you know what? I'll give you 1 day a year you can come out. I have a heart. I'll keep you there, but 1 day a year you can come out. This Jew didn't know, what day should he choose? Should he choose Rosh Hashanah? I mean, it's the first day of the year. He should spend it with his family and Jewish community, or Yom Kippur, but then he won't have a sukkah for Sukkot, but then what about Hanukkah? What about Purim, Pesach? He doesn't know. So what do Jews traditionally do when they don't know what to do? First thing, they ask their mother. But the second thing they do is they ask someone who has greater knowledge of Jewish law. So he wrote to one of the great Jewish halachicists of the time. That's how we know the story happened, because we have a copy of his response, the Ridvaz. And I like to imagine that, the letter comes back, the servant, the landowner, comes to the dungeon. It's late at night. He says, I got your answer. The guy's so excited. He opens up the letter. It says, choose tomorrow. Tomorrow is a Jewish day. Tomorrow's Tuesday, it's a Jewish day, you can be 100% Jewish, there's Jewish stuff to do, the way you conduct business, the way you treat other people, it's a way of life. So you have an opportunity to get out of the dungeon, do more things, choose tomorrow. There's no more Jewish day than tomorrow. Would you please speak to the role / impact social media has on reciprocity, community, and interconnectedness? So, like everything else, any gift that God has given us can be used for positive things and not such positive things. And sometimes it takes us time to learn how to regulate things that could be used in a harmful manner. One of the most interesting things, try this with your kids. If you gave the first generation that grew up with iPhones, like I think parents, we didn't understand what we were giving our children. Right? But if you ask, let's say your child, you gave at age 12 an iPhone, and you ask them, at what age do you plan to give your child an iPhone? It won't be 12. Right? Because they recognize that they weren't ready for that experience. And there's a learning that has to happen in how we have to handle something that has the potential for so much good, but also has the potential to be misused. So I think this is always the Rebbe's approach to any new technology or anything that comes into our world. The question is not, how do we get rid of this? The question is, this is a gift, now how do we use it properly? And I think that's, even in our current political turmoil, in our current fractured state, and our current sense of, what are we going to do? It's an opportunity. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of the UK, when he came to the Rebbe for an audience, he said to the Rebbe, in the circumstances that I find myself, and the Rebbe said, no. We don't find ourselves in circumstances. We choose to put ourselves in particular circumstances. So whatever circumstances you're in, you can choose differently. And I think that's the key. The key is to restore hope, and that this is part of a process. We don't have to have it all figured out, because we each have a piece to give. So when we figure out our piece, and we allow others to figure out their piece, e pluribus unum, we have a beautiful world.
Thank you, Rabbi Herman, for a beautiful evening. We all have friends who wish they were here. Luckily, thankfully, we have Matt White from Fourth Coast Productions recording tonight, and he'll be available hopefully later this week. And as I mentioned before, please help yourself to 1 or 2 charity boxes. Charity-ized, tzedakah-ized your life. It's a way. This is very characteristic of Rabbi Herman without, maybe meaning to do so. We didn't really choreograph this that much, but he came with beautiful ideas. Very erudite fellow. But the Rebbe always took the loftiest, most beautiful ideas and says, well, how can we actualize it, even a little bit? And somehow it popped in my mind to bring the charity boxes, so please help yourself and give it to any charity you deem worthy. We're now going to end the formal program. There's still dessert and tea and some beverages. Thank you very much. Tonight's lecture was sponsored by Chabad of Rochester, Chabad Pittsford, an anonymous donor, and some other generous folk that gave little bits here or there to sponsor the refreshments and other things. So thank you all. You know who you are. Thank you very much. And have a wonderful, healthy, inspired July 4th and summer.